says, Don hit a glass with a hammer. And then this one says, Don hit a glass with a hammer. So what happened to the glass?
It broke.
It broke. Why did it break?
Because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather was flat.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break. And the second one, Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
So in 6 minutes, I hope to have given you a good view of Piaget. If there's one, you're going to come back to Piaget in every single class that you have. But that might give you an idea of what the conservation tasks look like. So I hope you watched that, and I hope you got something out of it. And you might want to watch it on your own again a second time. So once again, your role really in early childhood is that transition to the concrete operational stage from pre-operational. So once children can reverse and think logically, they're at concrete operational. Once they're at formal operational, they can apply logic. And that was the last example in that video because the rules said that the feather would break the glass, even though the feather wouldn't, but they said that in this rule, the feather would break the glass, therefore the feather would break the glass. So our next theorist that we're going to look at is Vygotsky. Vygotsky has two topics. He has the topic of scaffolding and also zone of proximal development. So scaffolding is when an adult is smart enough to know what a child is capable of doing. Scaffolding is when the adult stands by, lets the kid learn on their own, and then interjects when they think that their learning experience can actually help and benefit the child. So the adult supports the child, and then when they struggle, the adult steps in. That's appropriate scaffolding. The key thing to remember in this concept is that you scaffold every child differently. What works for one might not necessarily work for all, which can be a problem. So, zone of proximal development. This is understanding the space in which learning and development occur. Basically, this is my way of saying that if I should know what third graders should do. I'm not going to go into a third grade classroom and expect them to color. Some of them might like it, but I'm not going to expect them to color. But I'm also not going to expect them to learn calculus as well. You have to teach within the zone that the child has and where they are most capable of achieving. So Erik Erikson is your next, person that we look at, and we look at the different stages of psychosocial development. There are 8 of them that we will look at. Obviously, when we're looking at early childhood, we'll look at the first 4. He comes out of sociology and psychology more than education because he's looking at crises that children experience. When we talk about these crises, children experience them at different levels and in different ways, and that can cause different resolutions from what a child knows. So in the stages of psychosocial development, we're going to look at each one of these, but notice we have trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. Everybody goes through these stages to live a full and healthy life, but we obviously know some people pass away sooner than others, and they might not make it to a certain stage. So children do not fall too closely to the positive or negative of the spectrum. And if they start to fall too closely to the positive or the negative end of the spectrum, then we have a problem. We want children to be more towards the positive side, but we need to allow for negativity to reduce the possibility of a child being too trusting or having too much faith in themselves at a really young age. Remember, when we're in elementary school, we want our kids to do well. It's important that our children do well. However, we can't have them have too much faith in themselves at a young age. Then we have a problem. So trust versus mistrust is basically between birth to 18 months and whether a child really, really how much the parents can handle and understand a child's needs. The parents need to have a good understanding of their children, and the children have to have their needs met in a warm and caring member. Trust versus mistrust is all in the hands of the parent and the caregiver. So autonomy versus shame and doubt, make sure, your job is to make sure that the children make correct decisions and that they are positive decisions, and that children learn how to make decisions. Not allowing a child to make decisions can be a problem, and that can cause them not to have autonomy, but doubt in what they're doing and doubt in the decision-making capabilities that they may have. So initiative and guilt, this is one of the ones that I would want you to star, because this is where you have to encourage the child to actually explore the world, see things from their own perspectives, and interpret them in their own ways. The child should have approval to go off and explore and then tell you what they saw and what they experienced, and then you help them make sense of it. That's the key in this stage, and that's what makes initiative versus guilt so important. So then we have industry versus inferiority. This happens randomly for a child. Honestly, if I was doing this in an ed psych class, I would tell you this is the first time that a child actually says, I can't do something. I'm not capable of doing A, B, or C. When that occurs, we have this notion and this understanding of industry versus inferiority. Basically, this is the fact that the child thinks they can't do something, the child gets a C or a D on a math test, and they determine they hate math. This is why, if you end up teaching kindergarten, first or second grade, you want to set your children up for success at all times. They have to understand rules, procedures, and expectations, but the key thing that you do is make sure that they're successful. So, in adolescence, identity versus role confusion, children make their own decision, but they have pressures from their peers, they have pressures from their family, and they have to determine what a good decision is and what a good decision particularly looks like. So, intimacy versus isolation, children experience love, or they feel isolated. If they have many relationships that don't work out positively, they can end up feeling alone, and they're stuck isolated the rest of their lives. It's how people can form relationships and move past the intimacy problems that make them stronger and more well-developed. So then, middle adulthood is where basically parents are settled and they say, this is what my life is going to be, I'm ready to be a dad, I'm ready to be a mom, I hit this point, and then they changed, have their own children, and now instead of it being about them, it's about the child. Good parenting, as you know and you've seen in research, is when it's no longer about you anymore, it's about the child. So integrity versus despair, this is when people, if they feel like they've done everything properly, they've achieved, they've been successful. They have despair if they feel as though they didn't meet all of their needs and everything that they were supposed to be doing as they were supposed to be doing throughout their life. So they start to think and they start to question, and if they have regrets, they fear death. If they don't have regrets, then they accept whatever the situation is. So next we look at Abraham Maslow. So in order to understand Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, you have to understand the foundation, which comes from Harry Harlow. So yes, this is another video, but I'm only going to show you videos if I think they actually matter. So this is a video on the dependency of monkeys.
Let me show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire mother. Now here are 106's two mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch. He's going to the wire mother. Stop to eat to live. He's going back. He's back on the pot mother, and he'll stay on the pot mother. Actually, this baby spends 17 to 18 hours a day on the pot mother, and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing.
Frankly, Doctor, if it comes to a choice between wire and cloth, it's reasonable to expect that any child will go to the cloth. It's a matter of creature comfort, like a baby with its blanket. But is this really love?
Well, what do you mean by saying that a baby loves its mother? Certainly one thing we mean is that it gets a great feeling of security in the presence of the mother. Now, Mr. Collingwood, wouldn't you say that if you frightened a baby, that it went running to its mother, was comforted, and then all the fear disappeared and was replaced by a complete sense of security, that that baby loved its mother? Now, in this experiment, this is the apparatus we use.
That looks diabolical.
That's just the way the baby monkey feels about it. Flashing eyes, loud sound, moving mechanical parts, all of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him.
He's scared, all right.
And he does what any child will do in a similar situation.
He runs away.
It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear. Contact with the mother changes his entire personality. Look, now he's actually threatening the diabolic love. All right. This gives us part of the picture of the strength of infantile love. This is a 6-foot square room with a few toys and other objects. But to the monkey, it's much more menacing. We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys. No mother is in there. Now, let's put a monkey into the room. Notice how cautiously he enters the room. He's searching for comfort, but nothing relieves his disturbance. Now we'll take the baby monkey out and put in a wire mother.
Now, this one was nursed by a wire mother.
That's right, all his life.
She doesn't seem to help much.
Now, we'll try the same test with a cloth mother in the room. You see the contrast in the behavior? Despite the fact that the wire mother nursed him, she could offer this infant nothing in the way of affection or security. But here the monkey, by rubbing against the cloth mother, as if he were seeking as much contact comfort as he could get, builds up his reservoir of affection and security. First, his body relaxes as the fear disappears. But above and beyond this, new positive response patterns appear. He now goes out to explore and investigate this new, strange world. He is now a normal, happy, curious baby.
So, I think it's important anytime you do anything with child development, you learn that we were permitted to do studies like this in the 1900s, before I was born, before all of you were born, before your parents were born, before some of your grandparents were born. You can't do stuff like this anymore. This is why in educational psych, when you have studies that are looking at child development and you're looking at animal development, none of this was animal cruelty then, but it is now. So most of our foundational studies on child development that deal with other animals and instincts, they're going to have taken place in the 1800s and 1900s, and it just is the way it is. So we're going to cover Maslow's hierarchy of needs much later in this class. It's a big concept, it's an important concept. What's important for you to know is this idea that schools are required to provide physical and safety to their students. All schools should provide food, water, sleep, homeostasis, and breathing to children. Safety, they should be able to have security, protection, anything they need, a shelter if they need it. And then love and belonging and esteem kind of be, you know, does the school have the responsibility to provide friendship to kids? Does the school have the responsibility to make kids feel good about themselves? You might think differently than I do, and we all probably have our own thresholds of what matters on this, and that's good because we all should. Here's my rule of thumb. If the school's providing these two, if they're providing safety and security and physiological needs, then they can start love and belonging and esteem. If the school is struggling on safety and security, then they have to think about what they can do to improve that, and they can take it at the expense of love and belonging and esteem if they have to. Schools are required to provide that, and that's why, and that's important. So, last video that we're going to look at, our textbook talks about Alfred Adler and his mistaken goals. I want to show you the textbook page first, that basically children need attention, power, revenge, and incompetence. And those are goals that children have that they mistake for other things. So this is the last YouTube video I'm going to show you. Like I said, this is a longer presentation, and I know that, but I think it's important that you see some of these videos. And if we were in a face-to-face class, I would do two full lectures on this chapter.
To help your business get noticed, you need a small card with a...
Sigmund Freud may have founded psychoanalysis, but his followers greatly extended and modified his theory. Alfred Adler and Carl Jung began as followers of Freud, but developed their own ideas into major theories. Alfred Adler was born and raised near Vienna. Although he grew up in a wealthy family, he had a difficult childhood. He was frail, unathletic, and suffered from rickets, a vitamin D deficiency that causes soft bones. He was also quite lonely. His father was busy being a grain merchant, and his mother was busy with 6 children. Alfred was the second oldest. Adding to his childhood trouble, Alfred always lived in the shadow of his older brother, Sigmund. That's Sigmund Adler, not Sigmund Freud. In his theory, Adler stressed the inherently social nature of man and the importance of future goals. Like Freud, Adler believed that birth order was important, but didn't stress unconscious processes. Adler was less concerned about where people came from and more interested in where they were headed. He preferred to focus more on the individual's goals. Adler's approach, called individual psychology, tried to understand and treat a person in a broader context. Alfred Adler is probably best known for coining the term feelings of inferiority. When we are inferior, we compensate for our weakness. If you hurt your arm, you use the other more. When you break a leg, you use a crutch. Stories of compensation abound. Demosthenes compensated for his stammering by putting pebbles in his mouth, running and reciting poetry until he could speak clearly. And of course he became a famous orator. Annette Kellerman could barely walk as a child, so she took to swimming. She became the mother of synchronized swimming and the inventor of the one-piece bathing suit. The heroes in the stories always overcome great obstacles by compensating. Compensation is a good thing, but overcompensation is bad. It means you're trying to cover up your weakness rather than acknowledge it and accept it. You act in ways that make you feel better. When you feel anxious or inferior, you act strong and brag about your accomplishments. If you feel inferior, you might even invent accomplishments or take credit for other people's work. The opposite of inferiority is superiority, which is similar to what others might call self-actualization. Superiority for Adler is not being more valuable than another, it is moving toward completeness and perfection. It's reaching one's own full potential. For Adler, there are three entrance gates to understanding a person's mental life.